Hey guys, today we're in the book of 1 Kings chapter 6. I have a new background for a couple weeks until I get my new office. But until then, just enjoy the birds in the background, I guess. But 1 Kings chapter 6, Solomon is now doing what his father wanted to do. If you remember, David wanted to build God a temple, but God said no. And so it is Solomon's job to build his temple, and now we are seeing the fruits of building that temple. In the 480th year after the people of Israel came out to the land of Egypt, in the 4th year of Solomon reigning over Israel, in the month of Zez, which is the 2nd month, he began to build the house of the Lord. Now, a lot of information is given to us here. Depending on where you place the Exodus, I'm an early Exodus guy. I think most of the history proves to that. But we have here a date of when the temple was built, and that date is off of the date of the Exodus, okay? Now, most scholars will agree that the temple was built around 1000 AD. Okay, but as you look at the Exodus, you get into the studying of the pharaohs, of the history of Egypt, the culture of Egypt, what's going on in Egypt, the pharaohs and the pharaohs' daughters of Egypt. I believe that the Exodus was around 1440, and if you really want to be exact, I would say it's 1447. Giving us the date of the temple to be built is 967 BC. All right. So 967 BC, this is when the temple starts to be built by King Solomon. 480 years after Israel leaves Egypt, and he began to build this. This is the actual construction. You can read more about this in 1 Chronicles 28, but we'll get there in a few months. But he's going to build it, and notice the dimensions there: 60 cubits by 20 cubits by 30 cubits. To the English measurement, that's 90 by 30 by 45. So 90 long, 30 wide, 45 tall. And when we look at some of these measurements, and there's a lot of them given here, and we're not going to go through all of them, but a good part of them is double the size of the tabernacle. Not all of them, but a lot of them are just simply double. He wanted to make something bigger and grander for God, right? This is no longer a tent that's going to be taken up and down and constructed and moved. This is one permanent building in Jerusalem that Solomon is building. And so he builds this. What's interesting about this, and I'll see if I can find some pictures of this, is how the explanation of the temple is being built. It talks about all the side chambers around the temple. It talks about these doors and these porticos. It talks about the 3 sections of the outer court. These are all things that I saw with my own eyes in Egypt last year. This was normal temple construction for a lot of different communities, cultures, deities. And so though it is grand, though it is for Yahweh, the construction is very, very familiar to all the other gods of the world at that time. Now, this is one for Yahweh, and this is for Jerusalem, and there are some things that are very particular to the temple, but the overarching idea is a very familiar scene, not just to the Jews who were in Egypt, but really to the world. Which is an interesting concept, because we think of the temple as being strictly Jewish, but all of the world would have seen it and would have had some familiarity with it and would have felt comfortable in it. Now, I think that's a lot of things that we necessarily don't think about, but when you're in Egypt, you see these things time and time again all over the place. Notice that when he built it off-site. They quarried all the stones off-site, they hammered, they chiseled, they cut all of the stones, all of the wood. And so when they got it to the site, when they got it to the holy site of the temple, it was just assembled there. There was no loud noises. This shows you the respect that Solomon had for God. Even though the temple is not constructed yet, the site and everything about it was very holy and very unique construction for Yahweh. As he was working on this, in verse 11, we see that the word of the Lord came to Solomon, and it says, notice that word, if, it's very important. If you walk in my statutes, if you obey my rules, if you commit my commandments, and if you walk in them. This is what we call a conditional statement, a conditional promise. God is saying, if you do this, then I will do this. And so it shows truly what God wanted, right? God just didn't want another kingdom, another civilization going. He wanted a king and therefore a kingdom, a group of people to do what? To follow His word, to read His word, to do the things that He says. He wanted a nation that was separate than any other nation in the world. It's exactly what He told Israel before He took them out of Egypt, right? It's what He told Moses at the burning bush. And so here He is telling him again, and He says, if you do all this, notice what God says, I will establish my word with you, and I will dwell among the children of Israel and will not forsake the people of Israel. Notice the language is here. He will dwell among the children of Israel. God is not a God of a temple. He's not the God of Egypt, of all the pharaohs. He's not a God of the Canaanites or the Hittites or the Perizzites or the Jebusites. He's not a God who lives in a temple and lives in an idol. This is a God who is moving and working. And He says, hey, if you do these, I will be among you. I will dwell among you. I'm not going to be in one room in a big building and you have to come to me. God is coming to them. I will dwell among you. I will be in and around you. This is an amazing promise because most of the time, though these temples are very common throughout the Middle East that they're building here for this God is promising to do something that no God promised. A God would never degrade Himself, bring Himself low enough to be among humanity, to be among common people. All of the gods of the ancient were to be high and lifted up and to be worshiped, but Yahweh is different. He says, I am coming to dwell among you. This is the same language that we see in the book of John when he talks about that Jesus put on flesh and dwelt among us. It's the same identical word. And so God comes in and lives in and around us. This is an amazing statement of who God is and delineates Him from any other god of the ancient Near East. So Solomon started to build his house, and you read of everything, but there's just a couple things I want to point out. Verse 19, the inner sanctuary. We know this as the Holy of Holies, right? The inner sanctuary, it is 20 cubits by 20 cubits by 20 cubits. This is 30 feet by 30 feet by 30 feet. This is complete double of the tabernacle. Of the tabernacle, it was 15 by 15 by 15. Now it's 30 by 30 by 30. It's overlaid with pure gold. There's chains on the veil that separates it, right? Remember, there's a veil that separates in the tabernacle, the Holy of Holies, from the holy place. There was a curtain. Now He's overlaid it, all these golden chains to kind of fortify the veil, to make sure that everybody knows the holy place you cannot enter. God is that holy. Not only is that gold, not only is the floor gold, but here, different than the tabernacle, he builds two cherubim, right? Two angels. Remember, there's two on top of the Ark of the Covenant, but he builds two ginormous ones. They're 15 feet tall, and their wingtips go from 0 to 10 feet. They're 10 feet wide, wingtip to wingtip. And there's two of them. It says it touches each wall. So you can imagine there's a cherubim blocking the right side 10 feet, the left side 10 feet, which leaves an entrance of only 10 feet. But there's still a veil. There's still gold chains hanging down, and these cherubim are covered in gold. And so you can imagine, just for one, how much gold, but two, just the beauty and the brightness and the ornateness of everything that has happened. Not only are they overlaid with gold, but then he builds doors that are made and overlaid with gold. The floor is gold. Everything there is overlaid with gold. It just gives you an impression of how much that Israel and Solomon truly thought God was holy. They literally gave him there was nothing more that he could do that would say, he could do it a little bit better. There was none of that. This isn't amazing. And even today, you can go and stand on the Temple Mount and just get an impression of the size and the things that it's an amazing place. Verse 36, he built an inner court with 3 courses of cut stone and 1 courses of cedar beam. Like I was saying earlier, this is very common for many temples, especially in Egypt. There would be 3 courts, and this is the courts where the priest would stand at, but there would be 3 layers of priests, right? You'd have all the priests in the first one, and then the upper echelon priest in the second one, and then the high priest up in the first one. There would be kind of a transition of holiness towards the ultimate holy of holy. And then we find out in the last verse, verse 38, he was 7 years in building this. And so it took them 7 years to complete all of this, from foundation to the final touch of gold, 7 complete years. And you just have to think, as Solomon is a king, his dad built the kingdom, made it really big. Solomon comes on in the first 4 years of his kingship. He starts to build the Solomon, and he spends the next 7 years of his kingship not going out, not going to war, not expanding his territory. He spent 7 years, really, the first 11, the first 4 getting everything together, and then 7 building it. The first 11 years of his kingship to build this temple. This was a mighty place, and this was a place of a great importance, not only for David, who wanted to build it, Solomon, who was building it, but it will continue to be a place where man can come and meet God. And that's the point of the temple. A holy God, unholy people, where can they meet? What happens at the temple on the Day of Atonement, on Yom Kippur, right? And so that's the place where man and God can meet. And 1,000 years later, it'll be at that same place where Jesus is taken away, taken to trials, carried outside of the gates on that side of the temple, and he was crucified. He could see the temple, he could see this building where he was crucified from. It's an amazing part where man and God meet through the blood of the perfect Lamb. Hope that makes a little bit more sense, and we'll see you tomorrow in chapter 7. God bless.